Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning into the 2021 Capitol Preview. I'm Grant Opperman. I'm going to facilitate the discussion today with Senator Bobby Joe Champion, along with Representative Fue Lee, and then Representative Esther Agbaje will be joining us shortly. I think the forum tonight is really just to give our local elected officials the chance to answer questions directly from constituents, which is probably a little bit harder to do in the middle of COVID. So that's the hope tonight. We appreciate you guys all sending in questions. I think we're going to cover a broad array of topics based on all the questions that were sent in. And then I think we're going to keep trying to do events like this. We have one more planned on February 16th, which has to deal with environmental justice, and we'll have a panel of leaders in the community on that as well. So without further ado, I'd like to send it over to Senator Bobby Joe Champion first, let him give upcoming remarks on the legislative session that's to come. And I know he wants to talk about the budget. So I'll kick it over to Senator Bobby Joe Champion.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And let me thank you all for all of your hard work in bringing us together and also presenting this forum for Senate District 59. As you know, that we as electors are always looking to serve and answer questions because we want you to be empowered by any and all information in order to best advocate for your interests at the Capitol. As you know, this is a budget year. So at the start of the biennium is always a budget year because this is our focus. We have to come up with a budget for the next 2 years. Unlike Washington, D.C., I like to make this distinction. We have to come up with a balanced budget. We cannot defer it. We can't do any of the other things that they can do in Washington, D.C., but we are required to pass a balanced budget. And as you know, based on our most recent forecast, we have a positive balance, state balance of $646 million. Now, again, that's going to be confirmed coming up in the February forecast. As you know, we get a forecast from December, and then there is a solidifying forecast that will happen either February 26th or February 28th of this year. Now, as I mentioned, that there is a $646 million balance. Now, this is an important notion to know because this is an improvement over the last previous projections in mid-2020, which called for a $4.7 billion shortfall. So now that we've had some turnaround, that's exciting in order to know that we are not looking at a deficit. And I hope and pray that when we get the news in February that this holds up. However, we will still need to address a projected deficit in 22-23 or a shortfall of roughly $1.3 billion. Now, in order to come up with a balanced budget, it is clear to make sure that everyone in the listening audience understand that you're going to hear a number of proposals to address this budget. You're going to hear proposals from the House and the Senate and the majority and the minority in the House and Senate, as you're going to hear some budget proposals from those who are in the House majority and the House minority as well. Everyone is going to come up with a proposal. But as of late, you probably heard a proposal that has come from the governor most recently, and that proposal was to address the budget. And I will quickly say that the governor is proposing a 2-year, $52 billion proposal that calls for an income tax hike for individuals earning $500,000 as an individual or a couple who are making more than $1 million. That's important to know that the governor is also looking to tap into the state's reserve for $1 billion. And I think we currently have, roughly about $3 billion in our rainy day account. That is what we call it. The governor also wants to borrow $130 million from the U.S. Bank Stadium Reserves account. And currently in that account, we have $83 million for this biennium, but it is expected to grow to more than $230 million in that account in 22-23. So most people say, well, how did it balloon to such a high number? As you know, that the U.S. Bank stadium reserves collects money from the electronic pull tabs, and those have been pretty successful. And so that is why that account is ballooning. And the governor will bring over approximately $217 million from this year's surplus. So remember, I talked about that there was a surplus of $646 million. So the governor is looking to bring that money over forward, right? And so now the governor is also proposing new spending of roughly $1.6 billion in new spending. And even though I can't tell you everything that he is projecting or proposing to spend money on, but I'll cover some highlights. He is asking for over $50 million for programs and special funds to help families and small businesses hit hard by the pandemic. He wants to continue to provide money for those small businesses and in forgivable loans, as well as emergency assistance grants. Because the pandemic, as you know, is unprecedented, and we've been taking an economic hit, and we still have so much further to go. And so that's one of the things that the governor is proposing to spend roughly $1.6 billion on. The governor also is proposing money for state aid to school districts and programming to help narrow the achievement gap and other racial disparities. And roughly, he's put forth a proposal of $745 million investment to help students recover and catch up on learning as a part of what they're calling the Due North educational plan. Now, I think it's important to also recognize that there's always federal funds as well that is coming into the state, and there's a desire for Congress to also act and send some additional money. But there's projected another $649 million in federal funding for COVID education recovery. We know that our schools have been decimated. There's been an increased cost around how do we keep students safe and teachers safe. And so that is a major investment that the governor is proposing. The governor is also proposing targeted investments for businesses affected by the civil unrest during the George Floyd demonstrations. The governor has proposed $150 million in what is called appropriation bonds for rebuilding Minneapolis and St. Paul businesses. Now, you will hear, and you've probably already heard, the Senate Republicans already pushing back on that proposal as well. The governor is also proposing to expand the working family tax credit for over 300,000 eligible households, while also he's recommending a one-time payment of up to $750 to roughly 33,000 or a little under 33,000 working poor families who participate in the Minnesota Family Investment Program. And there are other aspects of that proposal that you will see debated before we adjourn on May 17th, 2021. As you should know, that the new budget that we are debating right now and will pass will begin July 1st, because this biennium ends June 30th. So any money that we are putting forward around our budget starts July 1st, 2021. One other thing that I think is important to mention, when you think in terms of the amount of money that's coming into our coffers, when it comes to spending, we spend more money in education and health and human services. So that is important for folks to know. And remember that I've been talking a little bit about the governor's proposal, but you will hear, as I mentioned earlier, various proposals, some things that we will embrace as Democrats and some things that we will ask to be different. But that's the joy of debating and looking at what's in the best interest of one Minnesota. And so again, once we get that February forecast around February 26th or February 28th, and we'll see if the December forecast holds. And based on that reporting, the governor may revise his proposal, but certainly we as legislators will use the forecast numbers to make budget related decisions. So just remember, I believe, and I'm sure that I speak also for Representative Fue Lee and Representative Agbaje, that the budget should be a values document. It is not just about numbers. It's about people. It's about investments that are important in order for us to be able to move forward in a coherent and thoughtful way. So that is what I wanted to lay out as far as the budget, and I'll be happy to answer any specific questions around that. But I also like to call your attention to the fact that you'll hear and see that we will have another town hall meeting outside of the one you all are doing February 16th, on February 11th, where we'll have a fiscal analyst dig deeper into the budget issues, and we'll have our ranking member, Senator Uyghur, who's going to come and talk about education and some of the major things going on there. And then also we'll have Senator Wickland, who's going to come in and talk about what's happening in the healthcare area, along with the vaccination stuff. So those are things that I'll announce later, but I hope that I've given you a better preview as to what our sights I set on when we think in terms of the budget and spending, because we want to make sure that Senate District 59 and the constituents that we serve are positively reflected and their needs are going to be met by this value document that we call a budget. So thank you so very much.
Yep, absolutely. Maybe before we kick it over to Representative Lee, I'm going to ask one follow-up question. I think that was a helpful overview of kind of what the proposals we can expect of the budget are to come. Maybe from your standpoint, representing Senate District 59, what are some of the focal points and the priorities that you want to make sure are included in that budget?
Education is always going to be something that we believe to be really important. Jobs and economic development is going to be important. I'm really pushing for rebuilding our community and businesses, not just from the George Floyd demonstrations and unrest, but continue to make investments in business so that those investments can be a catalyst going forward. Healthcare is always important, as well as affordable housing. We need to make sure that our housing options make sense, right? Because people are paying an astronomical amount of money when we think in terms of housing, and how do we address that? Also homelessness, those who are unsheltered. How do we make sure that there's revenue and opportunities for them, and mental health, right? And all the other services that it really would take in order for individuals to improve their quality of life. And then when you think in terms of working families, how do we make sure that we are making the necessary investment for those essential workers and those who are having a very difficult time? So I just think it's important that we think about the entire spectrum of individuals that we serve. And so education, higher ed, affordable housing, healthcare, home ownership, all those things are important. So that's why I also think it's important, Grant. People sometimes ask me, well, tell me what your most important thing that you want to do, right? And I say, because we have so many issues that we need to deal with in real time, it's not just one, is to make sure we see the whole person and provide support for the whole person and not just one aspect of their life. Because I think when we have a siloed approach, then we miss improving a person's quality of life because we are so narrowly focused. But those are some of the things that I believe to be a highlight, and environmental justice. And I don't want to steal the thunder of my good friend, Representative Fue Lee, or even Esther, but those are things that we talk about in real time. So I hope I answered your question, but I could go on because I have a whole lot that I believe that we have to do in order to make sure our lives are improved.
We'll get to it. I promise. I don't want to take any more time away from Representative Lee. If you want to give some upcoming remarks on the legislative session that's to come, and just some of the priorities that you're focused on short term here.
Thank you, Grant, and thank you everyone for tuning in to the Senate District 59 town hall tonight. State Representative Fue Lee represented the A side of the district. I'm really excited for this upcoming session because I have the opportunity to serve as the chair of the Capital Investment Committee, and I think this is why elections matter. We need all of you to help Senator Champion and the rest of the Senate, so that we could actually have Senator Champion be a chair and really drive some of the conversation that we are having right now in the Senate. And so with regards to what we're doing in the House, similar to what Senator Champion is saying, we won't have our budget priorities or targets until probably the end of March. And then hopefully at the beginning of April, that's when we'll have joint targets with the Senate and the governor. But this is to be decided. We saw last year that we have some deadlines to have these targets, or not last year, but 2019 early on, but we did not get it done until the very last week of a session in May. And so just know that everything over at the Capitol is fluid. Even though we set deadlines for ourselves, things may change. Regarding capital investment, you all may be aware that this week we just wrapped up a week worth of hearing around how do we look at capital investment through a race equity lens, and how do we embed that in our process. And starting tomorrow, I would encourage all of you to tune in. We're going to start having a conversation around climate change and how does that impact our public infrastructure, and what do we need to do to be more resilient going forward. And I'm really glad to have the opportunity to have Representative Agbaje serve on my committee too, so that the Senate district in the north side have two representation in the House, and then Senator Champion also served in the Senate Capital Investment Committee too. And so we know that we're all fighting for all of you. Outside of capital investment, I just want to talk a little bit about serving on the Environment Finance Committee. Senator Champion already mentioned this. Environmental justice is very important for the three of us. What we are prioritizing right now is that we need to get some of the budget stuff that we did not get done in 2020 done. And so I just want to reference right now, we want to really push the bill that we have for spending the lottery trust fund money from 2020 out. We weren't able to come to agreement with the Republicans last year because they were hung up on the clean car rules that the governor was having the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency walk through and try to establish. And so we are, telling the Senate that, we're in the House, we need to focus on stuff that we did not have done before we can start moving on to something else. And so the chair Rick Hansen, likes to say that we can't really move on to the buffet line until we clear a plate. And so this is what we're doing right now. And once we move some of the stuff that are outstanding from the prior 2 year, we'll start focusing on some of the issues that what we keep pushing for. And so for me personally, in addition to environmental justice concerns around education, we're pushing to see what can we do to support our students out of the classroom now more than before. Because of the pandemic, we know that our students, especially the Black and Brown and our communities of color, are struggling the most during this time, and see what can we do to find resources. And I can say generally that in the Minnesota House, we, to Senator Chairman's point about our moral document, we want to raise revenue to really spend on helping Minnesotans, small businesses really get through this pandemic. So I'll just leave it at that for right now and take up any follow-up questions after Representative Agbaje introduce herself and talk about some of her priorities.
Awesome. Thank you. That's a helpful overview. Representative Agbaje, thanks for joining us. I know you're working late at the Capitol tonight, so we're happy to have you. We're just kind of giving our opening remarks, talking about the upcoming legislative session, and if you have any specific priorities you want to mention, I think now's the time, and then we'll dive a little bit deeper into specific questions from the constituents.
Sounds really good. Well, thanks so much, Grant, and thanks, Jeffrey, and everyone from SD59 for hosting us. I really appreciate it. I'm sure that Senator Champion and Representative Lee have done a great job talking about many of the priorities that we have happening both at the Senate and the House. So as Representative Lee said, I am on the Capital Investment Committee with him, and we've been doing a really good job of hearing from stakeholders just about how important infrastructure is, particularly to environmental justice as well as racial justice. So I appreciate having that opportunity to have that space to talk about our infrastructure and how we're investing in all of our communities. I'm also on the Housing Committee, which is really important to me. I talked a lot about that when I was running, and I'm really glad because we have also been spending so much time really focusing on supporting renters, making sure that they have the rental assistance that they need to stay in their homes. We're also working on making sure that homeowners are also supported during this time, so that way they can stay in the homes that they own, and trying to work to make sure that both that relationship between landlords and tenants is actually a beneficial one, and that we're not having to, that we're mitigating many of the effects of what could happen if the eviction moratorium ends without proper protections for people. So those are some of the things we're working on. Also looking at ways to continue to advance supporting, affordable housing, whether that's building more affordable housing or preserving what we have, looking at anti-displacement and anti-gentrification measures. As we are developing our community, we want to make sure that people can stay where they are. I don't know if either the senator or Representative Lee talked about COVID too, but the vaccines are coming online. So there's a lot of news and information about that. And, we know North Point is one of the providers of vaccines. And we're hoping that in the future that eventually there may be some, more opportunities for people to have access to the vaccine as more continue to come online. So I'm glad for the opportunity, looking forward to the questions, and can't wait to get started.
Sure. I mean, I think we can honestly probably start right there on the vaccines. Maybe you guys can talk a little bit about if there are pain points in the process right now, what the legislature is doing to solve them, and then maybe some more specifics on kind of district focused questions on, what are allocations going to be? Where can people go to get the vaccines? Are there ramp up plans? Maybe we'll cut it off at just a general vaccine question, and I'll let you guys tackle it and give us the update.
Well, I'll start by saying this. That there's been a commission and the administration that's really been dealing with the vaccination plan and distribution. They've been giving us updates about their plans and also how they are changing those plans in light of, unfortunately, on the federal level, there hasn't been, as promised, a certain number of vaccines or medication or doses that they were promised. So that has caused a real uproar. But the Biden administration has committed to giving states at least a full week projection so people have a better sense of what's coming their way and really deliver on that. Some of the things that's important for us is access and opportunity, right? And so we are trying to make sure that as they are going through the process and thinking deeply about how we're going to get as many Americans and our district vaccinated, we want to make sure that there are various ways by which to do that. One of the things I do know is that North Point has been doing vaccinations or inoculations, and so that is a positive, but we want to expand that. The other thing that I think is important, and I've talked to the administration about this, especially in communities of color, there's a natural distrust for the government, and there's a distrust as it pertains to the vaccination. So I've been talking about how do we simultaneously engage credible voices so that individuals will feel as if the vaccination is safe and that it's not just another bad blood experiment from Tuskegee or anything of that nature. So it's two things that are going on. One is credible voices. And so there's been a real decision to really make sure that they're using those credible voices. Two, access and opportunity that also, so the folks who want to do it can, and education. So those credible voices saying educated things about the information, and flexibility. So they are looking to expand that, especially for like teachers and essential workers, those who are over 65. And you'll see that they made a shift in the way that they were making the vaccine available, because at first it was a first come, first serve basis, and they realized that they couldn't do that because you see that the system broke down. So then they morphed to a system where they put everyone in a pool, and then they do a random selection of those people that are in a pool. But from my vantage point, we will continue to make sure that we have access, opportunity, projections around dosage, credible voices, in order to make sure that people feel safe. And that's not just people of color, but nurses are having some challenges because 30% of the nurses who have been asked if they want to do the vaccine or take the vaccine have declined. When you think in terms of long-term care facilities, so many people of color are there. And if you have people of color there who are caring for those are in congregate living and they're afraid to take the vaccine, then that's going to be a problem, because then we are not dealing with everything in real time. So that's what I'll say about it. We'll continue to make sure there's access, opportunity, information, and credibility put forward.
Great. Esther or Representative Lee, if you guys have anything to add. Yeah, I think that was a fulsome summary. Maybe the natural transition then is, obviously the vaccine's not out there in mass yet, and we're still dealing with a pandemic here. So I think we can flip to COVID-19 relief. I think, I think probably all three of you mentioned this in your opening remarks, but maybe talk a little bit about what you guys are doing to make sure the small businesses in Minneapolis and specifically in our district that are hurting from the pandemic are going to be in line to get the aid that, Senator Champion, you mentioned that's in the proposed budget thus far. So maybe talk a little bit about that. Whoever wants to start, by all means.
So I just want to quickly add about the vaccine. I see a question from the audience asking about what about folks who do not have internet access? How do you register for it? Do know that the system that we are running over at the state, there is a phone number that you could jot down, 612-426-7230, or call toll free at 833-431-2053. And I'm glad that this is being recorded so folks can catch this and really just reach out to them to if you do qualify and you're eligible to be into that register into that pool that Senator Champion mentioned. You could definitely do that. Fortunately, my dad has been vaccinated as of yesterday over at North Point, and so I'm really encouraging all of our community members to take advantage of the great community healthcare center that we have. Regarding assistance for our businesses that's been impacted by COVID, and in addition to that, the civil unrest. In October, we did pass a small business assistance bill, and I think that Senator Champion can speak a little bit to this too. But I know that we had around $25 million that was sent from the state to the county to assist businesses that were impacted by the pandemic. And so for any businesses on the north side, feel free to reach out to Hennepin County, to our offices, so that we can connect you with them, and also to our county commissioners too. We understand that we did our part over at the state to get the money to come into our local communities, and we need to hold our colleagues accountable for this. And then one last piece that I just wanted to mention around recovery. In my committee, we are planning to hear one of the bills that that I actually just introduced today for the civil unrest recovery. So similar to the governor's proposal of using appropriation bonds, for the state to borrow some money to help with that. And right now we're having conversation with both the city of Minneapolis and St. Paul to see what's the amount that's needed for that piece of the recovery. And so just for folks to know and stay tuned with the three of us to see what's going on over at the Capitol. And now I'll turn it over to Senator Champion to talk a little bit more about some of the specifics.
Thank you so much, Representative Lee. So as you know, what Representative Lee has said is right on point, and not to mention in December, I believe it was, that we also passed a bill roughly $215 million, and it was three tranches by which that money was distributed. Those businesses that can demonstrate that there was a 30% loss from the first 3 quarters and when comparing 2019 to 2020. And so the Department of Revenue was sending money directly to folks. And then there was a second tranche that was going through deed for theaters and also for convention centers. And then the third piece that Representative Lee talked about is counties. So one of the decisions was made that they wanted to use the 87 counties and allow them to have the discretion to make decisions about the eligibility and businesses that they will continue to support. Now, we all know, so let's just say this up front, $215 million is not a whole lot of money, right? And there's no way, based on the state's coffers and challenges, was there an opportunity to expand that pool. But one of the things that is true is that there's the CARES Act money and more federal dollars that are coming in. What also is true that we're going to continue to advocate for folks who are affected by COVID, businesses, that is, and employees, in order to get the support that they need. Because as we support employers, we are also supporting employees, not one versus the other, because we believe that both are important. And as I mentioned earlier, the governor has in his proposal roughly $50 million that will continue to help with forgivable loans and grants and of that nature. And then specifically, again, to what Representative Lee talked about, those folks that were affected by the civil unrest, because up to this particular point, let's really be honest, I've been pushing this, and I've been pushing the Senate majority to give our businesses the same level of respect that we do for natural disasters, especially when it's nothing that they did to cause the unfortunate place or space where they are. And they've been very resistant in order to do that. But I'm pleased that the governor has looked at putting in his budget proposal $150 million in appropriation bonds. And to underscore my point, did you see today that the Senate majority has put forth a bill that will prohibit any money being spent for Minneapolis and St. Paul or those affected by the civil unrest? So we'll continue to do everything that we need to do there. And I didn't mention this earlier, but I'm the ranking member on jobs in the Senate. So jobs is always at the focal point. And one of the things I neglected to say, but it still ties in here, is that equity is very important. And ever since 2016, we have invested over $100 million in equity for businesses of color and people of color around training and education. And we'll continue to do that, especially as we're going through this pandemic, so that we can look forward. So we will continue to make sure that our businesses get the attention that is needed, and targeted investments, not just investments, but also scalpeled, targeted investments. So that will be our driver.
Yeah, I'll just agree with everything that's been said. I mean, I think the real focus here is making sure that Minneapolis and St. Paul come out of this with the help that they need, because, we were hit with two, events that were out of our control, which is the pandemic and the civil unrest. And so both of those things need specific appropriations in order to make our small businesses and our community whole.
Yep, that's super helpful to hear. Maybe along the lines of COVID-19, the pandemic, the vaccine, maybe you guys can talk a little bit about what you guys are doing to make sure schools and teachers in the district have what they need to get back into in-person learning and keep it that way. Maybe if you guys can touch briefly on that topic, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I'll just start. I mean, I think, a lot of us are really focused on making sure that safety is first and foremost. I've had a number of teachers call me that they're really concerned about getting back into the schools in person without having the vaccine. So it's good to see that the state and the governor are trying to, increase or up the priority of teachers and students to getting the vaccine. And so we hope that that is rolled out in an effective manner to really get people back into the classrooms, which is where a lot of people do want to be. And so, but it's important that we're doing it in the right manner. I think what's also important is, you'll start to see some bills that really kind of focus on making sure that students have what they need during distance learning, that they have the tools, particularly when it comes to technological tools, access to broadband, so that way they can participate in the virtual classroom until people are getting back inside. And I think there's also some opportunities to look at, in addition to mask mandates that we have already, but making sure everyone's wearing masks and washing their hands. But, if there's things that we can be doing to making sure that the air is being filtered in a proper way, so that way we're moving that air while people are inside and together. But it's a long way. And I think, there's many places where I think the legislature can kind of step in to make sure that moving back into the classroom is done in a safe manner.
Got it. I don't know if Senator Champion or Representative Lee, if you have anything to add.
So I just want to add that right now in the House, our education proposal to address this issue around education is House File 4. Specifically in there, I am leading one of the efforts to provide funding for after-school learning programs. And I think that this is really crucial for all of our students, especially those on the north side who has been impacted by the civil unrest. And so right now the proposal is for $5 million to grant out to community organizations to partner up with our schools so that our students can have that additional enrichment, whether that's at the schools right now or when we get into the summer break. And so it's so important that we start looking at how can we support the students inside the classroom but outside when they're not within our institutions or not inside doing distance learning. And so I'll just leave it at that for right now. Thank you.
What I will say is I totally agree with my colleagues, but one of the chat questions is, what do we think about due north? As I mentioned earlier, that the governor has put forth $745 million, and there's going to be another roughly $600 million that will come from the federal government. And the devil is in the details, right? And so we are still working through the details to understand how will that plan be rolled out? What is the plan with specificity? So as we get more and more details about that, we certainly will share that. That's one of the questions that I hope that Senator Chuck Uygur will discuss on February 11th as well, because he's deeply in the weeds around that. But again, we want to make sure that any investment is targeted, impactful, and effective. And so I don't know all the details of the Due North plan because there's been a lot of generalities, but we are asking for specificity.
And if I could just piggyback on that point from Senator Champion, right now we only have the recommendations from the governor, the amount that he wants to spend. And so throughout the next few weeks, that's where we're going to have the state agencies come into our committees and present on their individual priorities from the governor.
Great. Maybe one last question kind of regarding the pandemic and relief. Representative Agbaje, I'll tailor this one to you, given that you're on the Housing Finance and Policy Committee, but what is the status of sort of the rent and eviction moratorium? Where is that headed? How long do you think that's going to be a necessary policy? Give us your thoughts there.
Yeah, well, thankfully we do have a new federal government, but also the previous one did send over some more money. So the state will be having, I think, close to $375 million for additional rental assistance. So that should be coming online. I know the Housing Commissioner has spoken to the Housing Committee about how they're looking to ramp that back up so people can get access to that. They're also wanting to do that in a way where they're coordinating not only with the tenants, but also with the landlord. So that way both parties are on the same page about getting that assistance. Additionally, there's also House File 40 that's going to be coming up. I think it's actually going to be heard in committee sometime next week. And, that's a bill that's really focused on making sure that people are staying in their homes and that they have the assistance that they need to be there. So that's it's a joint project by a number of community members, and it's being authored by Representative Howard. And I believe I've signed on to that as well. So those are the types of things to kind of keep people protected. We are talking about ways that, we can start to codify some of the help that we have been seeing both from the state and the federal government. So that way we have that safety net for people whenever the eviction moratorium expires, because we know there's a federal one and there's also a state one, but people are ready for the end of the pandemic. And so that's always a point of conversation that we have to make sure that before we take these protections away, that we have something in place to replace them with.
Great. Maybe the next question then kind of piggybacks off that. If you guys want to talk a little bit about your plans around affordable housing in the upcoming legislative session, what the projects are in the district, if any, give us your thoughts on the affordable housing part.
So I would say probably not within our specific district, but we have an opportunity in the Capital Investment Committee to address this, and so I'm looking forward to having the conversation in the governor's recommendation that was released on Tuesday. There was around $100 million for affordable housing infrastructure bond in there, and I believe that right now we see a need of over $400 million, and so we're going to have those conversations in committee to see what can we do. And I'm pretty sure that for us in the House, that's going to be one of our priority, and our number will probably be higher than that. And so we're just waiting to have those conversations probably in early February.
And what I will also say is Representative Lee is correct. And we will also attempt to expand that conversation in order to make sure that we have housing options and resources for shelters and other places, and also the surrounding services that folks will need. And so we want to make sure, as I mentioned earlier, when I said various housing options, I think that's important. And in your question, the key word is affordability. How do we make sure that housing is affordable? How do we make sure that we're also putting in place this sort of mechanism so those who are unsheltered, so we can move them to stable housing as well? And what supports do they need in order to do that? And then how do we make sure that people are not paying all their income in, rent, right? And so I think that requires a larger conversation around, affordable housing. Is it to the area medium income? It's so many questions. Are we going to do, inclusionary zoning? What are some of the other issues that we need to deal with in real time? So we're going to continue to have not just a narrow conversation about it, but a larger conversation. And last but certainly not least, I think we also should be talking about home ownership rates as well, because right now there's a large gap when we think in terms of disparities between people of color and whites. And we know home ownership also is the threshold to building wealth, and you use it for college and everything else. And of course, you don't want to get me on the whole platform about the affordability of college, because I got my second kid getting ready to go to college, and right now there's lint in my pocket, and I need to make sure that we do something in real time for all of us. So thank you so much, Grant, for the question.
Yeah, I guess we won't go down that road tonight. Maybe for a future event. Representative Agbaje, if you have any other comments on affordable housing, otherwise I think we can shift gears.
Yeah, I mean, again, I totally agree with my colleagues. This is definitely something we've got to focus again heavily on. We saw how important it was when the pandemic started, and I think that we're going to see a lot of really interesting bills come out, hopefully out of committee, but are being dropped. And, and a lot of it will also kind of help with protecting our civil legal system to make sure that tenants are able to access their rights, and that the court system is more simplified for them too.
Great. Maybe shifting gears, and I know this topic got a lot of notoriety, a lot of questions submitted on it, and it's pretty unsurprising because it's a problem that needs to be fixed. But I think we want to hear your guys' thoughts on public safety in our district, in our city, how that moves forward. There's clearly a need that it needs to be improved, and I think we all are curious to hear what your guys' plan is to do so.
So,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Senator Chapman.
No, go ahead.
So I would just kick it off. I think the most important thing that the three of us are prioritizing with the rest of the Minneapolis delegation is that we do not want to see any cut in local government aid. This is where, our Republican colleagues, both in the House and the Senate, wants to attack the city of Minneapolis and, take that away. And regardless of where you stand on the issues of law enforcement in the community, once they start chipping away from the local government aid, our city, facing the current budget shortfall that they are at, will have more struggle. And so public safety will continue to be a key. And so I think, for the three of us, that's something that we could agree on, that we need to really make sure that we don't cut any local government aid to the city of Minneapolis.
And if I can tag on to that, Representative Lee is exactly right. But I also think it's important for folks to know that on the state level, we don't do anything around defunding the police. We don't do anything around that whole notion, regardless of how people feel about it. I'm just talking about on the state level. There's been no bills introduced on the state level around defunding the police. That is for local jurisdictions by which to figure that out and to think about what is that public safety initiative that works best for their city. And so that's why local government aid becomes important, is because whether it's community, whether it's law enforcement, whatever it is, we want to make sure that our city has the tools and the resources that it needs in order to make sure that we all are safe and that we feel safe. And that we want to make sure safe is an important word, because we want to make sure that law enforcement works for all of us, no matter what it looks like. And I also think it's important for us to think about multidisciplinary options for when people respond, or when law enforcement respond for whatever amount of time that we have. I know in the suburbs, if someone is having a mental health crisis, there is the sort of relationship where someone from that field can definitely go out and deal with that in real time. And so Again, we're not making a call as it pertains to what the public safety notion should look like. That's for the city and all of our constituents to deal with that in real time. But on a state level, we also want to make sure that there are policies around making sure that law enforcement is responsible, whether it's use of force, whether it's chokeholds, whether it's people have talked about the residency requirement. We don't want to do anything that would impede the city of Minneapolis or others to make decisions that would make sense around making sure we are safe. And so our job is to make sure that with that local government aid comes money for all of our essential services, including fire, right? So, or if someone is having a medical crisis, we want to make sure that someone can respond in real time, because time is of the essence if someone is having a stroke or heart attack and those sort of things. And so local government aid is larger than what we sometimes think about. And we want to make sure that we do everything on the state level to make sure our city has the resources that it needs.
Yes, I think that that's definitely right with local government aid and making sure that those levels are competent enough to support the city of Minneapolis and their needs. I mean, I think some of the other things too is, I know a number of reforms were talked about in the special sessions, which I wasn't a part of, but I was following along, and I think that there are a number of good ideas that were brought up to make sure that our policing systems across the whole state of Minnesota are being held accountable and that people can feel safe when they do need to call the police. So I think that, bringing up some of those ideas that maybe didn't get across the finish line will be good to just make, to just ensure that the police are actually working for people, as many other public servants do. I saw that there's a question in the chat about gun violence and its relation to public health. And I think that's also kind of like the larger extent of this conversation, right? We need to make sure that our communities are safe, they have what they need, and that when it comes to common sense gun laws, that we are doing what we need to do to make sure that we have those background checks, that whoever's supposed to, own or have a gun is supposed to have it, and that it's not in the hands of the wrong people. So I think that that's important to think about how those two things go together, and both from a law enforcement perspective and also from a public health community perspective of what is in our communities that could be a danger, and how do we work with people to make sure that whatever issues they're facing, their needs are met in those situations.
And if I can just make sure that I highlight this as well, is that we also think that there needs to be preventative strategies that will make sure our young people are not involved in what we would call inappropriate activities. So we do think we need to expand after school opportunities and jobs and all the other things that will shift people's thinking. One of the things that we have been engaged with the city around, in fact, even last week when we met as a delegation, I am the chair for the Minneapolis delegation. And I believe Representative Sidney Porter, I think, is the Minneapolis delegation leader for the House. And so what we have been engaging the city around is what's also is their strategy for the George Floyd trial. When Chauvin and the others go to trial, what are they looking to do in order to make sure that the city's safe as well, right? And so there's a lot of discussions around that, and we're looking for additional guidance as to what are the plans, both community-wise and other ways by which to be responsive. And that's all a part of that public safety, law enforcement component. And so I just hope that we continue to have these discussions around public safety.
Maybe a follow-up to the point you guys make about making sure police can be held accountable. What are some of the ways the legislature can ensure that? Obviously the union for the police make it a little bit harder to, see it through, that some of these officers who have violated, violent laws 3-4 times are still rehired. What can you guys do in the legislature to make sure that police are held accountable?
So I would just add, feel free for my two colleagues who are attorneys on the call, arbitration reform, so that, when they are having those conversations within the department, the chief decides to terminate, one of their employees that, they are, there's no hindrance or anything right now for that person to be brought back into the job. I think that was part of the discussion that we had before. And, I also think that there's an opportunity for us to really start thinking about, I know that some of my colleagues are thinking about this, and this idea is not new around having law enforcement official, carrying insurance for, possibly when there's somebody that's involved in, the death of an individual. And so those are just some ideas over there that we could do and propose over at the legislature. I'm not aware of any right now because I don't serve on the Public Safety Committee. And so maybe the other two colleagues here can speak more to what's been proposed in some of the committees that they serve on.
I'm not on the Public Safety Committee, but I do know that that's something that they are talking about, that they want to bring up. So I agree. I think it's just going to have to go back to the standards that we're holding police officers to, and then making those uniform across the state. I mean, that's how it'll, then play back into the city of Minneapolis. But if we can, and I think there's, states across the country that are looking at a lot of these ideas too. So if we can make sure that, police are, once they are fired or dismissed or, disciplined for whatever their action is, that holds, and that it's a very high bar in order to turn it over. I think the holding their own personal liability insurance, similar to like doctors and lawyers, is also really important. And I think also making sure that we have the correct standards in place of like how long people need to be in training, what types of training they need, in order to make sure that we're having the type of law enforcement, whatever that ends up looking like for any community, that is actually being responsive to people. And I think at the state level, there's opportunities to kind of make that uniform, to make a standard uniform across the state, and then each city can kind of do what they need to do for their own communities.
And I think my colleagues are exactly right, especially the only other thing that I would underscore around arbitration. The reason why that's important is because chief of police across the state have said, if we have a bad actor and if we want to get rid of that bad actor, we do. And then when we do that, they go to arbitration, and then they are reinstated. One of the things that they're also thinking about around the proposal is having more objective arbitrators in order to sit on those arbitration panels, so that you're not getting or allowing defense attorneys, no problem intended, right? Because I'm a lawyer too. I'm not just selecting people who they believe will be more amenable to their perspective, right? Or pro cops or pro whoever. You want someone objective, and in the event that people are not demonstrating that objectivity, they don't want those people to be able to even be arbitrators. So that is important, and that was a part of what we talked a whole lot about when we were debating in the Senate, when the Republicans did not even want to debate that issue. The other thing that people have talked a lot about is residency. I talked about this earlier. People tend to think or believe, because there's that standing law that now prohibits the city of Minneapolis and others from considering or making it a requirement for people to live in a certain area. People believe that if we can debate the issue on a local level, on a city level, as to whether that's important or not, and if people have to live in your community, they tend to think that police and others will behave differently because they will be a valued member of the community. Around standards, that's something else that we talked about: training, making sure that cops are trained to do the work that they need to, or the engagement of community folks around these things. So we did try to give a little more power to the post board, because the post board was impotent, for a lack of a better word. And so we want to make sure that there are uniform standards and that there's a notion of accountability when law enforcement is not behaving adequately. So I'm not on the judiciary committees, but these are some of the proposals that I'm hearing a lot about. And last but certainly not least, there's also the Minnesota Department of Human Rights that is doing that study and doing that work on the Minneapolis Police Department. And so they're looking at, are there systemic issues that are creating more of a problem so that we are not getting the outcomes that we need. So to have another objective body sort of looking at that, I think that will be helpful as well, because it will not only just focus on Minneapolis, but it will also focus on some of the systemic issues that are plaguing the police departments across the state of Minnesota.
Thanks. Maybe changing topics a bit here. Representative Lee, I'll start with you since you're on the Environmental and Natural Resources Finance and Policy Committee, but maybe you three can talk a little bit about some of the initiatives you guys are going to bring forth in the upcoming legislative system revolving around climate change.
So I happen to also serve on the Climate and Energy Committee too. And, for us, today we had a conversation around the 100% campaign to really move towards renewable by 2040. Last year we had a proposal to do so by 2050, but because of some of the signs that we're seeing that there's an urgency, and so we're pushing that forward. And within that, Environmentals for Justice, there's current law right now states that garbage burning like the HERC downtown Minneapolis over by Target Field and Representative Agbaje's district is considered a renewable energy source. And we had an amendment in the committee to remove that out specifically for the HERC, because, at the end of the day, we need to prioritize the health of our residents, especially the folks on the north side, and not put profit over our health. And when my colleagues talk about how it's going to hurt the industries, it's going to hurt the businesses, what about people's lives? And I think that's a key point that we stress, and that's why we were able to put that on as the bill moved forward in the process. And so I'm hopeful that my colleagues in the Senate, I know that Senator Champion is going to be fighting for removing some of that language so that folks on the north side don't do not get hurt even more on that. And regarding my committee, and that's why this tomorrow and the upcoming week, we're going to have some conversation around climate impact and public infrastructure, where we're traveling throughout the state and we see how climate change is, causing extreme weather, and we're just putting money years after years into flood mitigation or all these efforts. My Republican colleagues talk about fiscal responsibility. Where's the responsibility in that? When we're just throwing money, every 5 or 10 years for the same infrastructure that we have out there because of us not, taking the serious threat of climate change. And so I hope that folks can tune in next week to really hear some of the conversation that we're going to have in committee around climate impact.
One of the things that I will also push for, along with everything that you just heard Representative Lee say, is that I hope I'm articulating this as clearly as I see it in my head, and that I've been pushing for with the appropriate agency, is aggregate reporting. What I mean by that is, if you look at reporting siloed, like this business, what are the particulates that you have going in the air, and then we are doing our permitting just based on that, and then we can say, oh, it's okay and safe. I believe that we need to, they need to look at the impact of all the environmental emissions that are going to air, along with traffic, and then look to make the connection between the aggregate numbers and reporting and the health of our community. Because what is happening is that we are not using that data, or even extracting that data in a way so that we have a better sense of, on Washington, if you got Northern Meadows, you got traffic, you got the roofing company. I mean, all those, like, what is the impact of that, and how is it affecting us here in North Minneapolis? Because we have higher rates of, asthma and all the other health components. And I believe it's because we are not looking at it from an aggregate perspective, that we're allowing them to, on a silo basis, get their permit, and therefore we suffer as a result of it. And so I'm going to continue to push for a different way by which to report information and data, and the way that it impacts North Minneapolis, or any community for that matter. So that's what I am going to continue to fight for. Renewables, of course, we have Jamez Staples that's right on Plymouth, where he's doing solar panels and so many other things. So we want to make sure there's opportunity, along with not just solar panels and installation, but also education so that we can get a number of our people engaged in the green economy in real time so that we can make sure that people are benefiting from what we need to do in order to make sure that we have a cleaner and safe world.
Yeah, I mean, all of those things are right on track. I think I'll just add, like, as we talk about environmental justice, it really is about the whole wellness of the community. So in addition to all of that work and figuring out in capital investment, like what our infrastructure is going to look like in a way that, you know, benefits the climate and also benefits people. We should also be looking at transportation, you know, as we're looking at whether the light rail will come through or more BRT, you know, making sure that those are electrified so that way that has a minimal impact on the environment. Also looking at food insecurity. We know we have a number of community gardens across North Minneapolis, as well as there's been a major push for more recycling and organics and trying to get us into zero waste. So like how we're looking at food and food waste and all of those things to see if maybe those are potential sources of renewable energy, and then just also making sure that, you know, people have what they need. And then finally, as we just continue to look at, you know, what are our lead regulations? Can we clean up the lead that we have in our schools and in the homes? You know, what does the soil look like? What is our water quality? You know, things that are happening in northern Minnesota, like with Line 3, like that does have an effect down here. And so we have to make sure that, you know, the regulations that we have in place are to the extent that like Senator Champion was saying, we know what the aggregate effect is, so we can push back on that. But at the same time, that we're also putting structures in place that way we don't have to wait until we get to the limit, but we're actually like mitigating that at the front end.
And if I could say one last thing, one of the other things I think is important is for us to diversify the environmental community, because what is happening right now, we don't see very many people that look like me or some of the other representatives here. And so if we really want there to be this sort of change, we got to make sure that they understand what we should be fighting against in order to make sure that we are preserving this wonderful planet. And so more awareness is necessary, and so that people behavior will change because they have a better understanding as to what they should or should not be doing. And so I think that's another important component to this conversation.
Definitely. Maybe one last topic from the audience has to do with ranked choice voting. I think 2 representatives recently brought a bill up, and I think a senator did as well, with regards to implementing ranked choice voting throughout the state. You know, and instead of me trying to explain how ranked choice voting works over video, anyone who doesn't know that's watching, I would suggest Google it. But maybe you guys can tell us your position on ranked choice voting and how you guys are thinking about that potential of implementing that statewide.
I mean, I think ranked choice voting is great. I mean, it's been working in Minneapolis and in St. Paul, so it'd be interesting to see what it looks like across the state. I know there are other states that have gone that way and they seem to have had success. Obviously, it's a learning curve, but I think that that's, you know, the education and awareness that we can put out that, you know, further strengthens, you know, access to the vote for people. And I also think that what it tends to do, particularly during the campaign season, is it does really make people focus on like their issues, how they want to, you know, address those issues and what they're bringing to the table, less so than like personalities and like what team you're on, because you can actually rank who you want and then you can express your preference in that way. So that's something I'm excited to see where it goes. I think it'll be interesting to see if we get to have that debate, but you know, it's something that we've already seen 2 of our major cities have, and they seem to be doing pretty well. So we should try to push it statewide.
So I haven't really seen the specific legislation you mentioned, Grant, but I will say this, that over the last 4 years that I served with the Capitol and the Government Operations Committee, we have heard different versions of ranked choice voting. I know that when I was sitting in the committee that has jurisdiction over election, I supported the proposal to allow for local municipalities throughout the state, if they decide to have ranked choice voting. And I'll put it on the record that for me right now, I think that ranked choice voting does work, but we still need to do that engagement so that all of our community members, know and understand that. And even your remarks in introducing the topic, just the complexity of ranked choice voting, I think that we need to do that education work. And if we are able to push that forward and really make sure that all of our community, especially those that are speaking English as a second language, know and understand that piece, I think that that's something that we should, implement in the state.
From my perspective, I think that we need to do everything that my colleagues have just said, because I do think what Representative Fue Lee has stated is true. Like there are mixed messages, and there's various forms of ranked choice voting that needs to be looked at seriously. Because I know that in the African American community, they have not always liked it because of the fact that they believe that it sort of chills the impact of people going to the polls or feeling like they should go to the polls because they don't really understand what it is. I just think that there needs to be some additional awareness and discussions about it, and see where it leads us. So I will be excited to see what it looks like, because as I mentioned earlier, that the devil is always in the details. And so once we get a better sense of that, then I'll have a better sense as to what policy or what notion of ranked choice voting we should or should not support.
Great. We've covered certainly a wide range of topics. I think we've hit the major questions from the audience. So I guess, we can end with just closing remarks. Like I mentioned at the top, this forum is just for you guys to get in front of the constituents directly in a world that's increasingly hard to do by the day. So if you guys have any closing remarks, Senator Champion, we can start with you.
What I will say, and I wish I would have said this also, that's connected to ranked choice voting, is that I really been pushing in and the chief author of Restore the Vote, because I think it's important to make sure that we increase everyone's opportunity to be engaged in our democracy. And I believe that should be at the forefront of all of our discussions, in order to make sure that individuals who are paying taxes and they're in our communities, that their voice is not stifled. So I think that's a very important notion. So the last thing that I'll say is thank you for having this forum. And it's just an opportunity for us to talk about and or to engage our community around questions that they might have. I think the more the merrier that we can do in order to make sure that we're expanding everyone's intellectual capacity or just insight around the policies that are being introduced. As I mentioned also earlier, February 11th, we're also going to have a town hall meeting that's going to dig a little deeper into some of the things that we're talking about around education, healthcare, vaccination, and a couple other topics, budget especially, and just having someone there who can certainly weigh into this. I see in the chat that someone talked about marijuana, the impact of marijuana candidates. I think that would be a great discussion to have as well. But as I think you said earlier, Grant, maybe at another time, right? But anyway, thank you again, and I sincerely appreciate it. And so that you also know, our colleagues and those who represent the Senate district, we get together every other week in order to talk about bills and be engaged with each other, so that we have a real bond with each other to talk about what's going on in both the House and Senate, because we are solely focused on how do we improve the lives of those who live in Senate District 59.
So I just want to echo Senator Champion's remark and thanking all of you, and thanking the residents of Senate District 59 for for this opportunity to engage with all of you, and for re-electing us, and for Esther electing her into this position. And you can see that the three of us, we will be working as a team, as a tandem over at the Capitol. Senator Champion shared with Representative Agbaje yesterday that when we were both in the minority in 17 and 18, we were still able to get stuff done for the north side and getting the north market for our district. And we saw last year when we were in the majority that we were able to bring in some bonding dollars for the north side and some of our community organizations over here. And so just know that we're really excited to work together going forward. And I know that the passion that Representative Jahzzar brings forward is going to really show, and I'm really looking forward to her leadership in my committee on the Capital Investment Committee too.
And I just want to say thank you again to the Senate District for hosting us. It is very strange that we have to do everything like this until things get safer, but I do appreciate this opportunity to still engage with the community, and that, to also live online so people can watch it later. As both Senator Champion and Representative Lee said, I am super excited to work with them. They have been great mentors so far, and I think our team is going to continue to do fantastic things for the residents of Senate District 59 across all areas. And I would just say that, I know for me, and I believe for also my colleagues, we're open to hearing from you. We're open to hearing from residents, and our job is to represent you. So we want to hear what you're thinking about, your ideas, your concerns, so we can be in partnership with you to make this the best district that we can. So thank you guys so much.
Well, thank you guys for joining us. I know you guys are busy, so this was super helpful, super informative. We will be back on February 16th to talk about environmental justice. I know Representative Lee, I believe you'll be there for that. So be on the lookout for, the date, the link and all that. And just want to say thank you guys to our 3 elected officials again. All right. Have a good night, everybody.